Hi, good morning, everybody, and happy Friday, and welcome to the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency's All Staff Town Hall. I'm Victoria Gonzalez-Gerlach, Deputy Secretary of External Affairs here at BCSH. Before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that your audio and video are disabled for this meeting, but you can communicate if you have a question or the question and answer box during the Q&A portion of the presentation. This town hall meeting is being recorded and closed captioning is available. To access it, please click the gear icon on the bottom right corner of your Teams screen and click on captions or subtitles to activate. We plan on sending a recording of today's meeting, including an exit survey via email following the event. We do have a full agenda today, and we are so excited for you to join us. First, we'll start with welcoming remarks from our very own Secretary, Lourdes Castro Ramirez. Then we'll hear from 4 of our boards and departments, including a presentation from the California Interagency Council on Homelessness on cultural responsiveness and relationship-centered engagement with tribal communities. We'll have a special video from the Department of Consumer Affairs Boards and Bureaus. We'll hear about the important work of the Cannabis Control Appeals Panel and the Alcoholic Beverage Control Appeals Board. And finally, we'll have presentations on implicit bias training for realtors from the Department of Real Estate and the Bureau of Real Estate Appraisals. Now, I'll go ahead and introduce our Secretary, Lourdes Castro Ramirez, to get us started.
Victoria, thank you so much. As Victoria mentioned, we are excited to be here with all of you. And as you can tell, we have a full agenda. First, welcome everyone. Buenos dias, bienvenidos. I'm grateful to be together again, particularly as we mark the midpoint of 2022 and as we kick off a new fiscal year. Let me begin by thanking each of you for your professionalism, your commitment to public service, and your hard work day in and day out. We have so much to be proud of, and I try to never lose sight of our collective impact and the fact that every member of this team is important. Office technicians and assistants ensuring that our departments run smoothly. Analysts identifying current and impending problems. Personnel specialists assisting with recruitment and hiring new workers. Investigators helping to protect the public by enforcing consumer protection laws, and managers bringing out the best in people and programs. Everyone matters. My deep appreciation to you for excelling and carrying out your function and your responsibilities. Without you, we would not be able to meet our mission and to turn bold ideas and good legislation into programs and initiatives that improve the lives of all Californians. And of course, to continue to do our good work, we need resources. And thanks to Governor Newsom, thanks to his leadership, and thanks to also the California legislature, we have a robust budget with significant investments in expanding the affordable housing supply, including homeownership, and continuing efforts to prevent and end homelessness. Funds for business modernization at the Department of Consumer Affairs, along with support to advance California's Care Economy Workforce Initiative. Resources to meet our obligations under the Federal Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. Money for student loan borrower assistance programs at the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. Investments in cannabis for a major public awareness campaign with dollars for a retail access program grant, a grant program. And of course, resources for operational needs. Plus, I am thrilled that the Department of Fair Employment and Housing is now the California Civil Rights Department, a name that better defines its mission, along with more resources to combat hate and discrimination. All in all, we had a lot of and we have a lot to celebrate. So please join me in the virtual victory clap as we prepare to begin the work of implementing these investments and maximizing their impact. Of course, another critical ingredient in our path to success is having a vision for the future, a plan, and also building bridges between diverse stakeholders. I'm delighted to share that the BCSH team has been gathering input from staff and from our partners and developing a new strategic plan. Our vision is very simple: to create a thriving and equitable California where people have access to safe and affordable housing, where consumers are protected, and where civil rights are safeguarded. Our strategic plan consists of 5 interlaced rings, just like the symbol of the Olympics. These 5 rings of equal importance include promoting civil rights and equity, building affordable homes for all, preventing and ending homelessness, protecting consumers, and strengthening engagement and operational excellence. And of course, our new strategic plan builds on the 4 pillars that we introduced earlier this year. Being person-centered in our service delivery, in our implementation and administration of resources, and of course, as we build opportunity. And a big part of the plan is to create opportunities to showcase department programs, to highlight best practices, and to enhance collaboration across state government. You'll be hearing more about the agency's strategic plan in the coming weeks as we put the finishing touches together. Finally, I have a special announcement. After much feedback, our agency is excited to announce the Secretary's Excellence Awards, an awards program to recognize and to honor employees across our departments, across our councils and across our boards, to honor and recognize them for their achievements and impact. On September 1st, we will unveil more details, including information on how to nominate a colleague, a supervisor, or even yourself. So start thinking about that person, that superstar among your team that you'll be nominating. And before I turn things over to Undersecretary Melinda Grant, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the leadership of our executive and administrative team here at BCSH. To our dynamic directors, to our commissioners, and to our executive officers. We would not be able to do what we do without all of you. With the leadership of our governor and your many contributions, we are making a difference in the lives of all Californians in building a better, brighter future. I'm so grateful to be part of this great team. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you all Undersecretary Melinda Grant.
Thank you so much, Secretary, and good morning, everyone. So far this year, our boards and our departments have accomplished great things to continue advancing our mission and values. Today, we will hear from our departments, at least 4 of them, about the ways they are exemplifying the 4 pillars in their work that the Secretary so eloquently just talked about. This is just a snapshot of the many wonderful things that you are doing and that we have accomplished over the year. So to kick it off, I want to introduce Vivila Hussey. She is the Tribal Liaison for the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, and she will be presenting on her work to engage tribal communities. Take it away, Vivila.
Good morning. My name is Vivila Hussey, and I'm the Tribal Liaison for the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. I'm also a descendant of the Choctaw Nation, and an individual with lived experience in homelessness. Going to open us up today with a land acknowledgement, as we do for all of our engagements at Tribal HAP. Land acknowledgements are formal statements that recognize and respect Native American tribal ancestors and descendants as the traditional stewards of the land, acknowledging the relationship that exists between tribes and their traditional territories. We wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the homeland of the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Nisinan people, the Patwin Wintun people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria tribe who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we are joining from in our virtual community, we are all on California Native American land. In July 2021, AB 140 authorized a $20 million HAP set aside to assist California federally recognized tribes in their goals to prevent and end homelessness. This is the first tribal specific funding provided to Cal ICH, which was created in 2017 and is recurring with every new appropriation of HAP funds. Next slide, please. The Tribal Liaison position for Cal ICH, a role that I filled on January 24th, 2022, was charged with engaging tribal communities, establishing new community partnerships, developing a culturally responsive statewide tribal housing program, and receiving all applications for funding by June 30th, 2022. Next slide, please. At Cal ICH, we have expertise on solutions to address homelessness, the development of new programs, and even in tribal housing. However, the diverse circumstances, needs, and expertise within 109 federally recognized tribes is not held within one person or even in one department. In order to offer meaningful solutions, a main function of ours has been tribal engagement for purposes of genuine partnership and inclusion. In February 2022, I began my outreach to every California federally recognized tribe utilizing a few different resources. HCD generously shared their housing contact lists. We utilized the Federal Register for proper tribal leadership engagement. And I also personally called every tribe at least once to introduce our agency, explain the opportunities within Tribal HAP, and determine who the appropriate tribal contact was. The telephone call was a key strategy, as traditional Native American culture largely centers around relationship. It is difficult to introduce oneself and build meaningful relationships with mass emails. Further, tribes have diverse levels of staffing, and many do not have housing departments nor housing directors. My telephone calls allowed me to engage in a manner responsive to each individual tribe. Next slide, please. Tribal HAP's tribal engagement has been unique in that our tribal partners are real partners in the development of our Tribal HAP program. Our tribal partners assisted us in the development of our Notice of Funding announcement and our Tribal HAP application. In fact, the model and tailoring of our application was done by tribal partners. Currently, through listening sessions and written feedback, tribal partners are assisting us in the development of an equitable, culturally responsive allocation formula, as we received requested funding of $48 million, but only have $20 million available to allocate this fiscal year. Next slide, please. When seeking to build and maintain good relationships with individuals or entities, we do our best to meet them where they are. We do not fit them into boxes sized for other relationships. We genuinely care about their well-being and communicate that in ways that engage them, listen to, and take action upon their concerns. We include them in decisions that impact them. We value their uniqueness and appreciate the richness their diversity brings. In the instance we cannot accommodate a need of theirs, we are transparent and apologetic. And as government employees, we're building new relationships with individuals or entities that are long disenfranchised by individuals who said they were from the government and were there to help. We approach engagement with humility, knowing that it is understandably challenging to trust us again. Further, we engage knowing that we can never be the experts on their experience. Our partners are the key to our program's success. We receive their wisdom with gratitude, and we follow through with what we've promised. Next slide, please. 6 months into Tribal Hub, we've developed new tribal and state partnerships. Our program is oversubscribed, and we're looking towards a state housing future in which tribal voices are represented and key in the development of programs and policies that effectively prevent and end homelessness in tribal communities. However, we're just at the beginning of our engagement journey. We will surely make mistakes on our path ahead, and we may not always be able to deliver everything our tribal partners want or need. However, coming from the perspective of honoring our relationships, we have a solid foundation with which we can navigate challenges together. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to thank you for the honor of presenting today. Please feel free to reach out to me with questions or comments, and I'll turn it over to Undersecretary Grant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivila, for your presentation on your efforts on behalf of Cal ICH to engage tribal communities with humility and care. And thank you to Deputy Secretary Wikrima for leading this issue area, and Executive Officer Julie Lowe. When we had first started looking at these pillars on the top of 22, it just gives us great joy as we look upon and see the great work that is happening. Next up, we will hear an update from the Department of Consumer Affairs on how they exemplify the second pillar, service delivery. They put together a wonderful video highlighting some of the most impactful work that we've seen thus far. Take it away. Let's play.
You can say there's a lot going on at the Department of Consumer Affairs, or DCA, with 36 boards and bureaus issuing 280 different license types to 3.4 million licensees, protecting 40 million California consumers. A lot going on is kind of an understatement. One thing that's always on is our mission of consumer protection and commitment to serving California. Here's just some of what we've been up to lately. Recently, the Bureau of Household Goods and Services seized a storage unit in Sacramento that contained the belongings of a family from Georgia who were victims of a hold hostage situation. This is a scheme in which a mover holds a consumer's possessions and demands more money than the consumer agreed to get their goods back. Thanks to the Bureau's actions, this story had a happy ending, and the family was reunited with their property. In June, the Contractor State License Board partnered with local law enforcement agencies from around the state to conduct a series of stings and sweeps uncovering unlicensed activity in the California construction industry. During these operations, more than 140 legal actions were taken, primarily for unlicensed or uninsured practice. The board's actions served as an opportunity to educate consumers and the risk of using unlicensed operators. DCA's Consumer Information Center is on the front lines of public service, providing answers and assistance to thousands of callers. The call center averages over 40,000 calls every month and over 2,000 calls every day from applicants, consumers, and licensees. Phone agents speak English and Spanish and can connect consumers to help in more than 200 other languages. Lastly, DCA goes beyond protecting consumers by saving lives through blood drives held throughout the year right outside headquarters. Dennis Sellers, DCA procurement manager, personally knows how vital blood donations are. 30 years ago, donors provided Dennis the 12 units of blood he needed to survive and thrive, following a crash that left him with life-threatening injuries. Now he's giving back to others in need of life-saving blood as part of DCA's blood drives, and encouraging other DCA employees to do the same by sharing his personal story.
Someone decided to donate their blood.
And that kept me alive. So I could donate to help keep other people alive.
These are just some highlights of the important work taking place every day at DCA and each board and bureau. DCA is proud of the work we do that impacts the lives of Californians every day.
Thank you so much, DCA, for sharing this video. We love to see the positive work being done to serve Californians and protect consumers. I know Deputy Secretary Mira Sheedy is looking on very proudly as she leads a lot of the consumer relations issues for this agency. I hope you're excited as I am for the next presentation. We will feature the Alcoholic Beverage Control Appeals Panel and the Executive Officer, Taryn Kinney, and the Cannabis Control Appeals Panel, Taryn Kinney. They will be doing a joint presentation on their work as they exemplify the BCSH pillars, including Pillar 3 of effective implementation. Take it away.
Good morning, BCSH team. I am Taryn Kinney, Executive Officer of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Appeals Board. Thank you so much for having me this morning. Next slide, please. I'm going to give a quick overview of the board, what we do, and our recent initiatives as they relate to agency's strategic plan pillars. The Appeals Board is a 3-member board created in 1955 by an amendment to the California Constitution. Susan Bonilla serves as the board's chair, along with Megan McGinnis and Charlene Palacio. The board provides quasi-judicial administrative review of Department of ABC decisions regarding issuing alcoholic beverage licenses, license conditions, protests against the license, and violations of law by a licensee. Next slide, please. The board is an entirely separate state entity from the Department of ABC and one of the smallest in state government, with a total of just 6 employees. The board hears cases at monthly board meetings and decides appeals based upon a review of the record and briefs filed by the parties. Next slide, please. To many appellants, the board may be a court of last resort due to the high cost and infrequency with which appeals are granted review in California's higher courts. The board's mission is to provide Californians who appeal with an efficient, timely, and approachable appeals process and a fair and transparent legal review. The board takes very seriously the broad impact its decisions may have on business owners, public safety, and California's communities. To that end, the board's decisions must be impartial and soundly based on the law. Next slide, please. The board is consistently working to ensure appellants fully understand their appeal rights and procedures, and strives to offer an easily accessible venue in which to seek review. The licensees who interact with the board range from billion-dollar corporations with hundreds of thousands of employees to a mom-and-pop shop with just one family member working the counter. The same ABC laws apply to all, and they all have the same right to an appeal. Some appellants choose not to hire an attorney and to represent themselves and may be unfamiliar with legal processes, so the board strives to provide easy to understand educational materials and step-by-step instructions for licensees. Another priority for the board has been expediting the time frame of deciding appeals while maintaining the focus on fairness and impartiality. While a case is under review by the board, the licensee's penalty from ABC is put on hold. This means businesses may remain open while the appeal is pending, so coming to an accurate and just resolution without delay is critical. Efficient, modern procedures and streamlined communication and collaboration have allowed the board to improve the average timeframe of appeals by more than 2 months, bringing prompt resolution and due process to licensees and the public. Next slide, please. For over 60 years, the board utilized a clunky paper and mail-based process. Think piles and piles of manila folders stacked high with transcripts and legal letters. In recent years, the board has focused on modernizing this process to make it more user-friendly, especially to a layperson. The board initiated law and regulation changes to allow electronic filing of appeals. The board also shifted to utilizing a digital case management system and conducts board meetings via teleconference to allow the public open access to its proceedings. Modernizing processes in this way is more cost efficient for the state and appellants, quicker, and improves accessibility for all. Before I close, I would like to take a moment to thank agency leadership for their continued support and our small and dedicated team for giving their best each day in the name of public service. Thank you. I'll now introduce Ann Hawley.
Thank you, Taryn. Let's move to the next slide, please. Great. My name is Ann Hawley, Executive Director of the Cannabis Control Appeals Panel. Today, I'll briefly talk about the history of the panel, its mission, and how the panel is working to meet two of agency's strategic plan pillars: efficient implementation through innovations and increasing equity and opportunity through our hiring practices. Next slide, please. In November 2016, voters approved Prop 64, which allows adults 21 years of age or older to legally grow, possess, and use cannabis for recreational purposes. It also established the Cannabis Control Appeals Panel. The panel is a quasi-judicial appellate body and is modeled after the Alcoholic Beverage Control Appeals Board. The panel's mission is to hear appeal cases from annual license holders who have received a final decision by the Department of Cannabis Control, and that relates to any penalty, assessment, denying, suspending, or revoking an annual license. The panel's scope of review is limited. The panel has 4 members and 1 chairperson. Dr. Berman, who was reappointed by Governor Newsom, serves as the chairperson. Ms. Moore was appointed by the Senate Committee on Rules, and former Majority Leader Calderon was appointed by the Speaker. Additionally, the panel has 5 staff members. Next slide, please. 2 areas that the panel has aligned its work to agency's 3rd pillar of efficient implementation is first, lowering our real estate footprint, and second, develop a case management system and portal. ABC Appeals Board and the panel have consolidated our workspaces, and we have benefited from the significant cost savings from splitting utilities and the cost of the lease. Next slide, please. Another efficiency that we've been working on is the panel's case management system. This is a screenshot of the system that is in production on the Salesforce platform. The area outlined in red are the stages of processing an appeal, and we will be able to view the stage of each case, attorney assignments, track workload, and the complexity of each appeal. And we can also track the license type of the appellant, the age of the case, and track other key performance indicators that can be viewed through reports in the internal dashboard. Soon, the panel will begin development on an external-facing portal where appellants and their attorneys can file paperless appeal on the panel's website. And this portal will be integrated into our case management system. Next slide, please. Over the past year, the panel has worked on the development of a strategic plan and the corresponding action plan to meet these goals. I'd like to do a shout out to the panel staff for their very hard work on this effort. And also I would like to thank the Department of Consumer Affairs Solid Unit who helped us with this effort. We have 4 main goal areas of our strategic plan, but today I would like to expand on the 4th goal area of diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring processes. Next slide, please. So here are some best practices we have identified for eliminating favoritism and bias in hiring processes. The first best practice is to require annual implicit bias training for all hiring managers. And then second, include bilingual abilities on the desirable qualifications section of the job bulletin. And then third, incorporate equity and inclusion statements in job postings and duty statements. Next slide, please. And our own agency, BCSH, is using this diversity, equity, and inclusion statement on their job postings. Many other departments, I should say, are using DEI statements to communicate to applicants that their department is committed to building an inclusive, diverse workplace, welcoming to people of all backgrounds. Next slide, please. Other best practices we identified for our action plan is to advertise job postings to a diverse network. So for example, community organizations, community colleges, job fairs, affinity groups. Don't solely rely on posting a job on the CalHR website. And then next, remove personally identifying information, such as the name and maybe the educational institution, to ensure blind screening of all applications. And another best practice is when forming the screening criteria, broaden the focus on applicable knowledge, skills, and abilities to give appropriate but not disproportionate weight to education over life experience. Especially for more entry-level classifications, be careful not to overlook a candidate who has applicable job and life experience. Next slide, please. And finally, ensure that the interview panel has a diversity of viewpoints because it will result in a stronger candidate pool and ultimately will help your organization build and sustain a workforce that is reflective of the state we serve. Next slide, please. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you to the Secretary and the BCSH team for all of your leadership and hard work. And now I'm sending it back to Undersecretary Melinda Grant.
Thank you so much, Ann, and just to Taryn as well for those wonderful presentations, continuing to learn so much about the great work that our appeals boards and panels are doing. I also just want to give a shout out to our Deputy Secretary, Erica Gonzalez, who leads our equity and appeals issues for our agency, and then also Deputy Secretary Kurgan, who leads our housing policy, who works closely with our very next presenter. Finally, we have a joint presentation and video on implicit bias training for realtors from the Department of Real Estate and the Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers. One is a department, one is a bureau within DCA. I love the tie. We'll watch a video from Commissioner Doug McCauley and a presentation from Angela Jamont, who's the Bureau Chief of the California Real Estate Appraisers. It is now your time.
Good morning. I'm Doug McCauley, Commissioner of the California Department of Real Estate. On behalf of our 370 employees, I'd like to thank the Secretary for inviting me to spend a few minutes with you to talk about our efforts in the area of housing, wealth, and equity. Owning a house truly is part of the California dream, and it's a huge part of wealth building. For DRE, when it comes to housing equity, we want to be part of the solution. DRE takes our role in this space very seriously, especially since equity and the need to house the residents of our state are critical parts of Governor Newsom's vision of a California for all. and one of our agency's 4 pillars. It's especially important in housing when you realize that for every dollar a white family earns in this state, a Black family earns 60 cents and a Latino family earns 50 cents. And that gap has widened during COVID-19. And add to that our historically high home prices, low inventories, and now even rising interest rates. And we have even more of a challenging housing market for those of color and minority backgrounds. To begin addressing historical inequities in housing, one of the most important things we can do is better educate ourselves and our licensees about the impacts of implicit bias in real estate, and how both the legacy of past and current discrimination leaves underrepresented communities struggling to compete in California's challenging housing market. Now we all have implicit biases. For example, what do you immediately think about if you know someone that drives a hybrid or electric vehicle? What if they drive a 4-wheel drive truck with huge tires? Being aware of your own implicit biases is especially important if you're a real estate agent helping a client purchase a home. Without consciously thinking about it, a real estate agent might only show a client homes in certain neighborhoods, or may never show them other homes in other neighborhoods. Here at DRE, our more than 430,000 real estate licensees must complete continuing education as part of renewing their license every 4 years. This past year, the state legislature passed and Governor Newsom signed new continuing education requirements for DRE licensees, adding an implicit bias course and an interactive component to the fair housing course to help real estate agents better understand how their own unconscious biases can influence home buying and the disproportionate effect of that behavior on communities of color. Right now, our DRE licensing staff are busy working with course providers to approve the new classes, which will be required for those licenses that expire January the 1st, 2023 and after. Additionally, there is legislation that would require additional education for anyone who wants to apply for a real estate license. If Senate Bill 1495 passes, applicants will need to complete courses on implicit bias and federal and state fair housing laws before qualifying to take their real estate exam. DRE isn't the only group addressing implicit bias. The Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers, which is part of the Department of Consumer Affairs, is also addressing issues involving housing, wealth, and equity. To learn more about their efforts, I'm pleased to introduce their Bureau Chief, Angela Jamot.
Well, thank you, Commissioner McCauley. Again, my name is Angela Jamot, Chief of the Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers, commonly known as BREA. I too want to thank the Secretary for this opportunity to share in this town hall of our role in the efforts of eradicating discriminatory practices in our space of influence. I would like to begin first by reflecting on how BREA came into existence. In the 80s, the United States financial sector and savings and loan industry experienced an implosive, which included complaints about faulty and even fraudulent appraisals. Taxpayers were left with shaken confidence on the U.S. financial system to protect them. The Congress addressed this problem by passing the Financial Institutional Reform, Recovery and Enforcement Act, which ushered in a number of industry reforms. But for today's focus, one notable portion of this reform was Title 11, which created the unique appraisal regulatory system. California responded to the federal enactment with the Real Estate Appraisals Licensing and Certification Law, which birthed the Office of, and now Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers. BREA is charged with a mission to safeguard public trust by promoting professionalism in real estate appraisal industry through licensing, enforcement, and education. Systematic issues within the financial sector includes discriminatory throughout the history and still today. The federal government nonetheless endeavors to address systematic issues within the financial sector. The federal government established PAVE, the Property Appraisal and Evaluation Equity, through an interagency task force of 13 agencies to address bias in home valuation. In California last year, the legislation passed and signed by Governor Newsom, AB 948, the Fair Appraisal Act. This bill mandates for all initiating applicants to receive cultural competency training and all renewal licensees to obtain both elimination of bias and cultural competency training. And to ensure appraisal, course providers and BREA was fully equipped to identify and evaluate best practices for instruction related to cultural competency and elimination of bias in real estate appraisal industry. The Bureau brought together via virtual session subject matter experts to share in an open forum. The Roundtable Symposium addressed cultural competency and elimination of bias, reaped an overwhelming success. With an 88% attendance rate of registered attendees, we had not only course providers and appraisers, but we had several other states across the nation and federal attendees. The Bureau had developed guidelines also based on the symposium for helping in course development. Being the first in our industry realm, it became very clear that California was paving the way in its efforts to ensure those in the appraisal industry had the knowledge, skills, and ability to bias aware, inclusive, open-minded, respectful, and fair to all. Again, I and the staff of BREA want to thank the Secretary and all her leadership team for allowing us this time of sharing what we've been involved in and for making this topic one of your priorities in our agency. Thank you again. Victoria?
Wow, thank you so much, Angela and Doug, for your efforts to exemplify the fourth pillar of equity and opportunity through implicit bias training for realtors. Now that we have wrapped up the videos and presentations, we'd like to provide the floor to you and answer any questions from the Q&A box. While we might not get to everyone's questions today, we will be able to respond to them next week and provide answers. So please use the Q&A box on your screen to enter your questions for us to answer. So while folks join and put their questions in the box, I want to go ahead and start with one question. So Secretary Castro-Ramirez, if you join me in helping, we did get one question just clarifying the tribal HAP program that Vivila spoke about. The question is it under the Department of Corrections and Rehab? Do you want to go ahead and clarify that question for us today?
Yes, thank you, Victoria. I can start clarifying, and I would love to introduce also our Deputy Secretary for Homelessness, Takshika Wikrema, to add a little more sort of context here. But the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, HAP, is administered by the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so it is administered by this amazing team led by Executive Officer Julie Lowe. We do work within the council across state government with 20 different state departments and agencies to ensure that the work to prevent and end homelessness is work that requires all hands on deck, that we're coordinating our investments at the local level and ensuring that we're reaching populations that for many reasons have historically been left behind. This is why I'm so proud of the efforts to ensure that we are approaching our engagement with tribes with humility, with care, with dignity, and that we're making this a priority. Takshika?
Thank you, Secretary, though I think you covered everything. But just to reiterate what the Secretary said, I know it gets confusing with the acronyms. So CAL-ICH stands for, as the Secretary mentioned, the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And we will provide you a link to that. Encourage everybody to go to the link, which is on the BCSH website, to learn more about what CAL-ICH, the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, does. As the Secretary mentioned, they provide grants like HAP, and it's part of HAP. The tribal piece, the $20 million that Vivila mentioned, is part of HAP, which goes out to counties, all the continuum of care leads that work on homelessness in the field, as well as big cities. So this tribal hub is really thanks to Vavila and her amazing work to provide this culturally responsive outreach. And as she mentioned, she is also somebody with lived expertise of homelessness, which is an added value here. But on top of the grants, CalICH also helps staff and executive council, which the secretary co-chairs with Secretary Galley of the Health and Human Services, to again try to bridge connections between all the different state entities. And they also do broad policy work around putting forward evidence-based practices, person-centered approaches to make sure that we are really talking to all the stakeholders around the best way to really resolve homelessness across the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dakshika. So several of our departments today highlighted the ways that they are advancing equity and working with diverse communities. Secretary, why is this important?
Yeah, great question, Victoria. I think it is so important for us to be always aware and reminding ourselves that the work that we do impacts people, impacts families, impacts communities. And I so enjoyed today's presentations by various leaders from across the agency and our departments, because they were able to present not only the policy or the program, but how it directly affects and impacts people. As we continue, as we begin this new fiscal year, and as we continue the implementation of these values, these 4 pillars that our Undersecretary shared with us throughout the presentation, I encourage you all to continue lifting up stories of impact. I encourage you to continue to showcase with your colleagues across departments and in the community the work that we're doing within agency. I'm also excited as we implement this year's budget with the priorities that the governor has established, priorities around doubling down on equity, diversity, and inclusion. Within our agency, Erica Gonzalez is leading an interdepartmental group to bring best practices and to knowledge build. I'm also very excited about strengthening our tribal government-to-government relationship and very much looking forward to working with Secretary Christina Snyder within the governor's office. I look forward to the implementation of new initiatives, including the initiative that will be led by the California Housing Finance Agency under the leadership of Tina Johnson Hall, the Dream for All initiative, which will promote greater access to homeownership. So lots to be excited about. Being people-centered means sharing their stories. Being people-centered means making time for us to come together and lift up the good work that we're doing.
Thank you, Secretary. We had another question about homelessness. The question is, why does homelessness seem to be a bigger problem?
I can begin, and I would invite 2 of my colleagues now, Dakshika Wikrema, Deputy Secretary for Homelessness, and also our Housing Deputy, Sasha Kurgan. First of all, I think it's really important just in terms of addressing the question to take a step back and, Dakshika in her remarks made mention to this, right? Our approach to addressing homelessness in the state requires that we work across different entities and sectors. But our approach also requires that we understand the root causes of homelessness, because in understanding the root causes, we will develop and address the solutions more comprehensively. And the framework that we're using within our homelessness response at the state level is one that recognizes that there are historical, systematic reasons for why individuals and families are experiencing homelessness, including the disproportionate impact that homelessness has on Black, people of color, Indigenous individuals and families. And so we have to be mindful as we develop solutions that it is important to understand the disproportionality of that. And the framework that we're using, which I think is codified in the Cal ICH structure, is one of approaching addressing homelessness with more investments in housing that is deeply affordable, because frankly, I believe that homelessness is a result of not having sufficient, dignified, safe, and affordable housing. And then the second pillar of our framework is around deeper investments in health and human services, very much working together. And so I'd like to just maybe ask Sasha and Dakshika if they'd like to just add a few additional pieces about what those investments are that the state is driving to ensure that we're continuing to prevent and end homelessness.
Sasha, do you want to go first?
I'm very flexible. I'm happy to. So I want to make sure to share a resource with everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha Kurgan. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Housing, and really happy to be part of this team. And you've heard from some of our other team members that are working along the continuum of housing solutions. Though they're not on camera, we also have the Executive Director from our Housing Finance Agency, our Executive Director from the Housing and Community Development Department, all working together along with efforts with the State Treasurer's Office, the Controller's Office, and many others who are part of our work along a continuum to increase housing supply. This is not just an issue that's affecting California. It's not an issue that only started in California, but we are seeing some of the most severe results of housing undersupply, effects of inflation, but this is not just recent. This is some not recovering from the last crash. This is income inequality manifesting along with the lack of housing supply, reducing the number of available and affordable homes in California, but there are many national reports that share how this trend is happening. That's not lost on our federal partners, and actually recently the Biden administration released a plan called the Housing Supply Action Plan. And I will just say that we are aware that our partners in DC looked to California for many innovative strategies, from planning for housing to building and constructing housing, removing barriers to housing construction, encouraging jurisdictions to say yes, and work with communities to increase housing supply for people at all income levels, and then providing more state support for the construction and ongoing operations of housing than we have seen in our lifetimes, honestly. And so that is energy that needs to be matched at the local level, and it's work that needs to be done in partnership with those who are working on the homelessness side of our house, because these things are interconnected. So we're so excited to have our Deputy Secretary of Homelessness here. These are not things that work in isolation. We are building broad coalitions, and when we make investments in housing that is intended to serve people who are exiting from the homelessness system, we expect that those owners, operators, and cities are working in a larger framework of the homelessness response system within their communities. Dakshika?
Thank you, Sasha. And just to address the question a little head on around why are we seeing more homeless folks since Governor Newsom took office, I think part of what you're seeing from the responses is this is not something that spiked just with this governor. This has been building for 50 years. And so this goes back to policy decisions made in the 70s and 80s. And we are now facing the repercussions of those policy decisions now. In the 60s, there was a housing surplus. Imagine that. In California, you and I could all graduate high school, get a diploma, get a factory job, and we could afford housing in California. Those days are gone. because of those policy decisions made in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it takes time sometimes to see the results of those policy decisions. So what that means on the ground then is even if the homelessness system in tandem with the housing system that Sasha mentioned is housing, say in LA as an example, 20,000 people experiencing homelessness were housed in 2019 over that calendar year. 20,000 people. No other jurisdiction in the United States achieved that number. But guess what? There was still an increase. Why? Rents kept going up because Sasha mentioned the undersupply. So there's a supply and demand issue. And some of the previous presentations today also talked about kind of the wealth generation, the wealth gap, where certain people have money that they can use if they have a job loss or some kind of medical emergency. Some folks don't have that. They don't have family members that they can rely on. So if your rent goes up $100, that means, and I have heard these stories myself, 80-year-old woman with a 60-year-old son who's autistic having to live in their car because the rent went up $100 because they're on a fixed income. So what that means is even if 20,000 people were housed, 25,000 people could become homeless because of rents going up. So there's a dynamic issue. Happy to talk more. I will say September 1st, there's a public meeting of the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. So please join and some of these things will be discussed, but it is a very complex issue that interrelates a lot of the failed safety nets. And so we need to really do a lot of work. It's not going to be fixed overnight. But I hear what you're saying. You do see more people. It doesn't mean that work is not happening, as Sasha has mentioned, around building housing.
Thank you so much, Dakshika and Sasha, for that really thoughtful response. Really great discussion here today. We are about to wrap up. We are almost at time. And so I just want to hand it over to our secretary for any of the final remarks.
Thank you so much, Victoria. To all of the presenters, thank you. From approaching engagement with humility and care to being on the front lines of public service, you all make us so proud. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to also let you know that I will be serving as the vice chair of this year's Our Promise campaign, along with co-chairs Amy Tong, the Secretary of Government Operations Agency, and Josh Friday, the state's Chief Service Officer. This year's Our Promise campaign celebrates 65 years. The campaign officially kicks off on October the 3rd, so mark your calendars. I hope that you will all participate in this year's campaign. Our promise is about giving back to nonprofits that are always there for us. You can give to any of the nearly 5,000 nonprofits of your choice. Last year, we were very engaged and involved, and we're very proud to receive an award thanks to the great participation of employees. Again, I hope that you will be inspired to give this year. The amount that you give is not nearly as important as taking the actual step and making a contribution. Finally, Victoria, Jason, everyone at agency that made this gathering possible, gracias. Thank you for pulling all the pieces together. And thank you all so much for what you do every single day. May you have a safe summer, and I look forward to our continued success together.